The telegram had arrived at noon, informing Katherine Keller that her aunt's boarding house in Aspen, Colorado, was now hers, along with debts she could not imagine paying. And she stood on the dusty Main Street in late September of 1878, clutching her carpetbag and wondering if she had made a terrible mistake leaving Philadelphia. The air was thinner here, 1,600 miles west of everything she had ever known, and Katherine found herself taking deeper breaths as she studied the wooden buildings that lined the street. Aspen was a silver mining town, not yet booming but growing steadily, and the mountains rose around it like the walls of a fortress. She had never seen anything so beautiful or so intimidating in her 22 years of life. "Madam, you look a bit lost," a voice said behind her, and Katherine turned to find a man in his mid-20s watching her with concern. He wore dusty trail clothes and a wide-brimmed hat, and his face was tanned from long hours in the sun. "Can I help you find something?" "I am looking for the Silver Bell boarding house," Katherine said, then immediately continued, unable to stop herself as words tumbled out. The cowboy's serious expression softened into something warmer, and his eyes, which Katherine now noticed were a striking shade of gray-blue, held hers with unexpected gentleness. "I could listen to you forever," he said simply. "And I can take you to the Silver Bell. I am staying there myself." "Name is Xavier Armstrong." Katherine felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with the thin mountain air. "Katherine Keller," she managed, "though most people call me Kate." Xavier picked up her carpetbag before she could protest and gestured down the street. "It is just 3 buildings down. Your Aunt Margaret was a fine woman. Half the miners in this town owe her for kindnesses she showed them." As they walked, Katherine found herself studying Xavier from the corner of her eye. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, and despite the trail dust and worn clothes, there was something solid and trustworthy about him. She had met plenty of men in Philadelphia who dressed far better but inspired far less confidence. The Silver Bell was a 2-story wooden structure with a covered porch and flower boxes in the windows, though the flowers had died from neglect. The paint was peeling in places, and Katherine could see where one of the porch steps needed repair. "It needs some work," Xavier said, following her gaze. "Your aunt had been ill for some time before she passed. She tried to keep up with things, but it became too much for her." Katherine climbed the steps carefully, testing each board, and pushed open the front door. The interior was dim and smelled of dust and old cooking. A narrow staircase led to the upper floor, and she could see a parlor to the left and what appeared to be a dining room to the right. Everything was shabby but had clearly once been maintained with care and love. "How many boarders are there currently?" Katherine asked, setting down her other bag. "Just 3 of us now," Xavier said. "Myself, old Mr. Patterson who works at the assay office, and Mrs. Chen who does laundry for the hotel. There used to be 6 or 7, but after your aunt got sick, folks started finding other places." Katherine walked through the downstairs, cataloging everything that needed attention. The list was long and overwhelming. The kitchen needed a thorough cleaning. Several window panes were cracked, the furniture was worn, and she suspected the roof leaked based on the water stains she could see on one ceiling. The debts the lawyer had mentioned suddenly seemed even more insurmountable. "I do not suppose you know how much my aunt owed?" Katherine asked, turning back to Xavier. "I heard it was near $800, Xavier said carefully. "Mostly to the bank for loans she took out trying to keep the place running while she was sick. Doc Morrison never charged her for his visits, but the medicine cost plenty. $800 might as well have been $8,000. Katherine had exactly $43 to her name. She sank into one of the dusty parlor chairs and tried to think practically, but panic was making it difficult. She had no family to turn to. Her mother had died 2 years ago, and there were no siblings, no cousins, no one. This boarding house was her only option, her only chance at independence and survival, and it was already failing. "I can see you are doing calculations in your head," Xavier said gently. He crouched down so he was at eye level with her, his hat in his hands. "Let me tell you what I am thinking. This place has good bones. Your aunt had a reputation for running the cleanest, friendliest boarding house in town. With some work and some time, you could build that reputation back up. Aspen is growing. More miners come every month, and they all need places to stay." "But the debt," Katherine said. $800, and I have barely enough to feed myself for a month, let alone make repairs and pay off loans." "The bank will give you time if you show them you are making an effort," Xavier said. "And as for repairs, well, I am handy with a hammer. I could help with that." Katherine looked at him carefully. "Why would you help me? You do not know me at all." Xavier was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "Your aunt gave me a place to stay when I first came to Aspen 2 years ago. I had been working on a ranch that went under, and I had nothing but my horse and my saddle. She did not ask for rent until I found work. She gave me food and treated me like family. I owe her, and now I reckon I owe you." Something in his voice told Katherine there was more to the story, but she did not press. Instead, she stood and brushed off her skirt. "Then I suppose I should start by cleaning this place top to bottom. Will you show me where my aunt's room was? I will need a place to sleep tonight." Xavier led her upstairs, where a narrow hallway connected 5 small bedrooms. He pointed to the room at the end. "That was hers. I am in the room across the hall. Mr. Patterson is next to me, and Mrs. Chen is next to your aunt's room." Katherine opened the door to her aunt's room and found it frozen in time, exactly as Margaret must have left it. The bed was neatly made, clothes hung in the wardrobe, and a journal sat on the bedside table. Katherine picked up the journal and opened it to the last entry, dated 3 months ago. "The pain is worse today, but I am grateful for small mercies. Mr. Armstrong fixed the leak in the roof over the kitchen, and Mrs. Chen brought me soup. I worry about what will become of this place when I am gone. I hope Katherine will forgive me for leaving her this burden, but I have no one else, and I built something good here once. Perhaps she can build it again." Katherine closed the journal and pressed it to her chest, feeling tears prick at her eyes. She had not known her aunt. Well, her mother's estrangement had seen to that, but these words touched her deeply. Margaret had thought of her at the end, had hoped for her, had believed in her. "I will make this work," Katherine said aloud, though she was not sure if she was speaking to Xavier, to her aunt's memory, or to herself. "I do not know how yet, but I will." Over the following days, Katherine threw herself into the work with a determination that surprised even her. She woke before dawn and did not stop until well after dark. She scrubbed floors and walls, washed windows and linens, polished furniture, and organized the kitchen. Xavier proved true to his word, repairing the porch steps, fixing the cracked window panes, and patching the roof. Mr. Patterson, a kindly man in his 60s with white whiskers and gentle eyes, helped her sort through her aunt's financial papers. Mrs. Chen, a quiet woman who spoke limited English but communicated volumes through her kind gestures, showed Katherine where her aunt had kept supplies and introduced her to the shopkeepers in town. Katherine visited the bank at the end of her first week in Aspen. The banker, a stern man named Horace Cummings, looked at her with obvious skepticism when she explained who she was and what she intended to do. "Miss Keller, I appreciate your ambition, but $800 is a significant sum," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Your aunt had been falling behind on payments for months before she died. The bank has been patient, but our patience is not infinite." "I understand that, Mr. Cummings," Katherine said, forcing herself to speak slowly and clearly instead of letting her words run away from her. "I am asking for 3 months to prove I can make this work. I will make partial payments each month, and I will increase the boarding house's occupancy. If I have not shown significant progress in 3 months, then you may do what you must, but please give me this chance." Cummings studied her for a long moment. "2 months," he finally said. "Show me you can fill those rooms and make regular payments, and we will discuss an extension. But I warn you, Miss Keller, this is a business, not a charity." Katherine left the bank with her hands shaking but her resolve intact. 2 months. She could do this in 2 months. She had to. She spent that evening creating advertisements to post around town, offering clean rooms, hot meals, and reasonable rates. Xavier helped her hang them the next morning, and she watched him work, noticing things she had not let herself notice before. The way his hands moved with competent certainty. The way he spoke gently to his horse. The way he tipped his hat to every woman they passed and helped an elderly man carry parcels without being asked. "You are very kind," Katherine said as they walked back toward the boarding house. Katherine stopped walking and pressed her hand to her mouth, mortified. Xavier stopped beside her, and when she dared to look at him, he was almost smiling. Not quite, but almost. "Kate," he said quietly, "I meant what I said that first day. I could listen to you forever. I like the way your mind works, jumping from one thought to another. I like that you are not afraid to say what you are thinking. Most people guard their words so carefully that you never really know them. But you are honest and open, and that is a rare thing." Katherine lowered her hand slowly. "You truly do not mind. I truly do not mind." They stood there on the dusty street, looking at each other, and Katherine felt something shift between them, something fragile but real, something that made her pulse quicken and her breath catch. "I should tell you," Xavier said, his voice a little rough. "I will be leaving in a month or so. I have been saving money from my work at the mine, and I am planning to buy land south of here. Start my own ranch. It has been my dream since I was a boy." Katherine felt something deflate inside her chest. Of course he was leaving. Why had she let herself start to feel something for him? She barely knew him. It had been less than 2 weeks. "That is wonderful," she said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "You should pursue your dreams." "But," Xavier continued, still watching her face carefully, "I find myself reconsidering my timeline, thinking maybe I could stay a bit longer if there was a reason to." Katherine's heart started beating faster. "And is there a reason, I mean?" Xavier took a step closer. "I am beginning to think there might be." Before Katherine could respond, a commotion erupted down the street. Raised voices, the sound of breaking glass, and then a gunshot that sent people scattering. Xavier immediately stepped in front of Katherine, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. "Get inside the nearest building," he said firmly. "Now." But Katherine could see what was happening. 2 men were fighting outside the Silver Slipper Saloon, and one of them was Mr. Patterson. The older man was being shoved roughly by a much younger, much larger man wearing a deputy's badge. "That is Mr. Patterson," Katherine said. "I cannot just leave him." "Kate, stay back," Xavier said, but she was already moving forward. The deputy had Mr. Patterson by his shirt collar and was shouting in his face. Katherine could not hear the words over the blood rushing in her ears, but she could see that Mr. Patterson was frightened and that a small crowd had gathered to watch, but no one was intervening. "Stop that right now," Katherine said loudly, marching up to the deputy. "Let him go." The deputy turned to stare at her. He was perhaps 30, with a mean face and whiskey on his breath. "This is none of your concern, lady." This Chinaman lover was defending that laundry woman, saying I had no right to take her money. Well, I have every right. We got a tax for foreigners in this town, and she has not paid. Mr. Patterson is my boarder, which makes this absolutely my concern, Katherine said, drawing herself up to her full height, which was still several inches shorter than the deputy. And I am quite certain there is no such tax. You were attempting to steal from Mrs. Chen, and Mr. Patterson was right to defend her. The deputy's face flushed an ugly red. You calling me a thief? I am calling you exactly what you are, Katherine said. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. Now release Mr. Patterson immediately, or I will report your behavior to the sheriff. I am the deputy, the man snarled. I am the law in this town. Then the town has a problem. Xavier appeared at Katherine's elbow. His hand was still near his gun, and his face was calm, but his eyes were hard. I think you heard the lady, Deputy Walker. Let Mr. Patterson go, and leave Mrs. Chen alone. Everyone knows that tax is your own invention, and everyone knows you have been pocketing money from the Chinese families in this town for months. Several men in the crowd murmured agreement. Deputy Walker looked around and seemed to realize that the mood was turning against him. He shoved Mr. Patterson toward Katherine, and the older man stumbled. Xavier caught him before he could fall. This is not over, Walker said, pointing at Katherine. You just made an enemy, lady. I will survive, Katherine said coolly, though inside she was terrified. Walker stalked off, and the crowd began to disperse. Mr. Patterson was trembling, and Xavier helped him toward the boarding house while Katherine went to check on Mrs. Chen, who was standing in front of her laundry with tears on her face. Katherine took the older woman's hands. Are you hurt? Mrs. Chen shook her head, but she squeezed Katherine's hands tightly. Thank you, she said in her careful English. Thank you. That evening, the 4 residents of the Silver Bell sat together in the dining room, something Katherine had not taken the time to do before. She had been so focused on work that she had been eating quickly and alone. But tonight felt different. Tonight they felt like something more than a landlady and her boarders. You should not have confronted Walker like that, Mr. Patterson said, though his tone was grateful rather than critical. He is a dangerous man. He has been extorting money from the Chinese residents for months, and the sheriff either does not know or does not care. Most people are too afraid to stand up to him. She was very brave, Mrs. Chen said quietly. She had prepared tea for everyone, and Katherine sipped it gratefully. She was foolish, Xavier said, but there was warmth in his voice. Brave, but foolish. Walker holds grudges, Kate. You need to be careful. I cannot just stand by and watch someone be victimized, Katherine said. I know I should probably be more cautious, especially given my precarious situation with the bank and the boarding house. But I saw him hurting Mr. Patterson and frightening Mrs. Chen, and I just reacted without thinking, which is something I do rather often, acting before I think. My mother used to say it would be my downfall, but I cannot seem to help myself when I see something unjust happening right in front of me. Xavier reached across the table and covered her hand with his. I know. It is one of the things I admire about you. Katherine looked down at his hand on hers, feeling warmth spread through her. When she looked up, she found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. Mr. Patterson and Mrs. Chen exchanged knowing looks. I think I will retire early, Mr. Patterson announced, standing up with exaggerated stiffness. These old bones need rest. I also go to bed, Mrs. Chen said, following suit. Thank you for tea and for today. Suddenly Katherine and Xavier were alone at the table, his hand still covering hers. The lamp cast warm shadows across his face, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the way his eyes seemed to hold depth she wanted to explore. Kate, he said softly, I need to tell you something. She waited, her heart pounding. When I came to Aspen 2 years ago, I was running from something, Xavier said. My family had a ranch in Texas, a good spread with cattle and horses. My father was a hard man but fair. He taught me everything about ranching. Then when I was 21, there was a drought. We lost nearly everything. My father took out loans, borrowed from everyone he could. He thought if we could just make it through to the next season, we would recover. Xavier paused, his thumb moving absently over Catherine's knuckles. But the next season was no better. The bank foreclosed. We lost the ranch. My father, he could not live with that failure. He went out to the barn one night and he hanged himself. Katherine gasped, gripping Xavier's hand tighter. Oh, Xavier. My mother had died years before and I had no siblings. I was alone with all that grief and anger and shame. I drifted for a while, working odd jobs, drinking too much, fighting anyone who looked at me wrong. I was headed nowhere good. Then I came to Aspen and met your aunt. She gave me a place to stay and a reason to stop destroying myself. She told me that my father's choice was not my fault and that I could not honor his memory by throwing away my own life. She was a wise woman, Katherine said gently. She was. And she made me promise that I would save money and buy land and build the kind of life my father would have wanted for me. That is why I have been working in the mines and living cheap. That is why I have been planning to leave. But now, he looked directly into Catherine's eyes, now I find myself wanting something I did not expect to want. What is that? You, Xavier said simply. I want you, Kate. I want to hear you talk about everything and nothing. I want to watch you stand up to corrupt deputies, even when you should be running the other way. I want to help you build this boarding house into something successful. I want to be the person you turn to when things are hard and when things are good. I know it has only been 2 weeks, and I know I should be more cautious, but I have never been much good at pretending I do not feel what I feel. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. I want those things too, she whispered. I've been trying not to want them because you said you were leaving, but I want them so much it frightens me. Xavier stood and pulled her gently to her feet, then cupped her face in his hands. I am not going anywhere, he said. Not without you anyway. He kissed her then, soft and careful, and Katherine felt like she was falling and flying at the same time. She had been kissed before, awkward stolen kisses from boys back in Philadelphia, but nothing like this. This felt like coming home to a place she had never been, but had somehow always been searching for. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Xavier rested his forehead against hers. I should probably court you properly, he said. Take you to dinners, bring you flowers, ask permission to call on you. Katherine laughed a little breathlessly. I think we might be doing this backwards, but I do not mind, although I would not say no to flowers. They stood there holding each other for a long moment before reluctantly separating. It would not be proper for them to be found embracing in the dining room, no matter how much they wanted to stay exactly where they were. They said good night in the hallway, and Katherine went to her room feeling lighter than she had in years. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and slow building romance. Katherine placed advertisements in newspapers in nearby towns, emphasizing the boarding house's cleanliness, good food, and proximity to the mines. New boarders began to arrive. A young miner from Cornwall, a carpenter looking for work in the growing town, a widow who had come to keep house for her son and needed temporary lodging. Within a month, the Silver Bell was nearly full, and Katherine was able to make her first payment to the bank. Xavier continued helping with repairs, but he also began courting Katherine properly. He brought her wildflowers he picked in the mountains. He took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant. They went on long walks through town and talked about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. Katherine learned that Xavier loved poetry, which surprised her until he explained that his mother had been a schoolteacher and had read to him every night. He learned that Katherine had always wanted to write stories, but had never had the confidence to try. She learned that he had a scar on his ribs from being kicked by a horse when he was 12. He learned that she was afraid of thunderstorms because lightning had struck a tree in her yard when she was a child. They talked and talked and talked, and true to his word, Xavier never seemed to tire of listening to her. Even when she rambled about inconsequential things, he paid attention as though every word mattered. But not everything was easy. Deputy Walker had not forgotten Katherine's public defiance. He found small ways to make trouble, claiming the boarding house sign was blocking the sidewalk and demanding it be moved, insisting that Katherine needed additional permits she had never heard of, spreading rumors that the Silver Bell was poorly managed and that the food was bad. Katherine dealt with each challenge as it came, but the constant harassment wore on her. One evening in late October, after Walker had shown up demanding to inspect the premises for code violations, and spent an hour going through everything looking for problems he could not find, Katherine sat in the kitchen with her head in her hands. Xavier found her there. Without a word, he sat down beside her and pulled her into his arms. "I am sorry," he said. "I wish I could make him stop. I just do not understand why he hates me so much," Katherine said into Xavier's shoulder. "Do not apologize to him," Xavier said firmly. "You did nothing wrong. He is trying to break you because you stood up to him and made him look bad in front of people. Men like Walker, their pride is everything. But you are stronger than he is, Kate. You are going to outlast him." Katherine pulled back to look at Xavier's face. "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know you," Xavier said. "I have watched you rebuild this place from nothing. I have watched you win over every boarder with your kindness and your cooking and your endless energy. I have watched you handle setbacks that would make other people give up. You are the strongest person I have ever met, Kate. Walker does not stand a chance." Katherine kissed him then, putting all her gratitude and affection and growing love into it. When they parted, Xavier looked a little dazed. "What was that for?" "For being you," Katherine said. "For believing in me. For being here." As November arrived and the weather turned colder, Katherine began preparing the boarding house for winter. She bought extra firewood and made sure all the windows were sealed properly against drafts. She started serving heartier meals, stews and roasts and fresh bread that filled the house with wonderful smells. The boarders settled into comfortable routines, gathering in the parlor after dinner to read or play cards or simply talk. Katherine realized one evening that she had built something more than a business. She had built a home, a real home, for herself and for these people who might have been strangers but now felt like family. Mr. Patterson reading by the fire with his spectacles sliding down his nose. Mrs. Chen knitting quietly in the corner. The Cornish miner, whose name was Thomas, teaching the carpenter, William, to play cribbage. The widow, Mrs. Hartley, sharing stories about her late husband. And Xavier, always Xavier, watching her with those gray-blue eyes that made her feel seen and valued and loved. They had not said the words yet, but Katherine could feel them hovering between them, waiting for the right moment. She had never been in love before, not really, but she knew that was what this feeling was. This wanting to share every small moment of her day with him. This confidence that he would understand her, even when she barely understood herself. This certainty that whatever challenges came, they would face them together. The right moment came on a cold November evening after the first real snowfall. Katherine went out to the back porch to watch the snow falling silver in the moonlight, and Xavier followed her. He wrapped a blanket around both their shoulders and pulled her close. "It is beautiful," Katherine said. "I have never seen snow fall quite like this, so quietly and peacefully, like the world is being covered in a clean white blanket that hides all the rough edges and makes everything look perfect and new, which I suppose is fanciful thinking, but I cannot help it. There is something about snow that makes me feel hopeful, makes me feel like anything is possible, like all the problems that seemed so overwhelming yesterday might not be quite so bad tomorrow." She stopped and smiled up at Xavier. "I am doing it again." "I love it when you do," Xavier said. Then, more quietly, "I love you, Kate." Katherine felt her breath catch. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have loved you since that first day when you said you could listen to me forever. No one has ever said anything like that to me before. No one has ever made me feel like my too many words were anything but a burden. But you make me feel like every part of me is exactly right." Xavier kissed her deeply, and when they finally pulled apart, they were both smiling. "I want to marry you," he said. "I know we have not been courting long by most standards, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to build a life with you, Kate. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to hear all your stories and your rambling thoughts and your endless observations about the world. I want to give you children who will inherit your quick mind and kind heart. I want everything with you." Katherine felt tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it. I want to marry you, Xavier Armstrong, and I want all those things too. And I know my mother would probably say this is too fast and too impulsive. But my mother spent her whole life being careful and conventional, and I do not think she was ever truly happy, not the way I am happy right now, and I do not want to waste time being cautious when I could be living." They held each other on that snowy porch, making promises and plans, and Katherine felt like she had finally found the place she was meant to be. Not just Aspen, not just the boarding house, but here in Xavier's arms, building something real and lasting with someone who loved her exactly as she was. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church. Mr. Patterson walked Katherine down the aisle, since she had no family of her own. Mrs. Chen helped her make a dress from fabric they bought at the general store, a simple but elegant design in deep blue. The other boarders attended, along with several townspeople who had become friends. Even the sheriff came, which Katherine appreciated, especially given Deputy Walker's ongoing harassment. Xavier wore his best suit and looked so handsome that Katherine felt her heart skip when she first saw him waiting at the altar. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her thoroughly enough to make several people chuckle. The wedding breakfast was held at the Silver Bell, with everyone contributing dishes. It was loud and warm and exactly what Katherine had always imagined family gatherings should be. She looked around the dining room at all these people who had become so important to her in such a short time, and she felt profoundly grateful. That night, Katherine and Xavier moved her belongings into his room, which would now be their room. Xavier had spent the previous day making it as nice as he could, bringing in additional furniture, hanging new curtains, and placing fresh flowers on the dresser despite the season. "I know it is not much," he said, looking around the small space a little uncertainly. Katherine wrapped her arms around him. "It is perfect," she said. "It is ours." Their wedding night was tender and passionate and everything Katherine had hoped it would be. Xavier was patient and gentle, and Katherine felt safe enough to be vulnerable in a way she had never been before. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, talking quietly about their dreams for the future. "I still want that ranch someday," Xavier said, running his fingers through Katherine's long hair, which she had unpinned and let fall loose. "But I do not need it right away." The boarding house is doing well, and you have worked too hard to walk away from it now." "What if we kept both?" Katherine suggested. "What if we continued to run the boarding house but also bought land outside town? We could start small, maybe just a few cattle at first, and build it up slowly while keeping the steady income from the boarders. It would mean a lot of work, managing both, but I think we could do it. We could hire help for the boarding house as it grows, someone to assist with cooking and cleaning, which would free up time for us to spend developing the ranch." Xavier propped himself up on one elbow to look at her. "You would do that? Split your attention between two businesses?" "I would do that for us," Katherine said. "For our future. I know how much the ranch means to you, Xavier. It is your father's dream, and I want to help you achieve it. But I also have built something here that matters to me, and I am not ready to give it up. So why should we have to choose? Why can we not find a way to have both?" Xavier kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "Have I mentioned that I love you? You have, but I never tire of hearing it. I love you, Kate Armstrong. I love your mind and your heart and your endless determination to find solutions to impossible problems." Katherine smiled against his chest. "And I love you, Xavier Armstrong, now and always." Winter settled over Aspen in earnest, bringing heavy snows and bitter cold. The boarding house became a warm refuge, and Katherine's reputation as an excellent cook and kind landlady spread throughout the mining community. By January of 1879, she had a waiting list of potential boarders and had made enough money to satisfy Mr. Cummings at the bank. In February, she had a difficult conversation with the banker about her desire to expand rather than simply maintain. "I want to buy the vacant lot next door," she told him. "I want to build an addition to the boarding house, add 6 more rooms and a larger kitchen. The demand is there, Mr. Cummings. I turn away potential boarders nearly every week. With more space, I could double my income within a year." Cummings looked skeptical, but the ledgers Katherine had brought told a story he could not ignore. The Silver Bell was thriving under her management. She had not missed a single payment, and her business was growing steadily. "What you are proposing would require a significant loan," he said. "I understand that, but I believe it is a sound investment. Aspen is growing, Mr. Cummings. The silver mines are producing more ore every month. More workers are coming to town, and they all need places to live. The hotel is always full, and the other boarding houses are not as well maintained as mine. I can offer something better, and people will pay for quality." After considerable discussion and negotiation, Cummings agreed to the loan. Katherine left the bank with her hands shaking but her spirits high. She was taking a risk, a significant one, but she believed in what she was building. Xavier supported her completely. "We will make it work," he said when she expressed doubts late one night. "You have never failed at anything you have set your mind to, Kate. Why would this be different?" Construction began in March as soon as the weather allowed. Xavier oversaw much of the work himself, hiring skilled carpenters and laborers, but doing plenty with his own hands as well. Katherine continued managing the existing boarding house while also planning every detail of the addition. She drew sketches of how she wanted the rooms arranged, selected paint colors and furnishings, and calculated costs down to the penny. It was during this busy time that Deputy Walker made his final, most serious attempt to cause trouble. He showed up one evening with a document claiming that Katherine's property was actually partially on town land, and that the addition she was building encroached on a public right-of-way. He demanded she stop construction immediately and threatened legal action if she did not comply. Katherine knew the claim was false. She had carefully reviewed the property survey before beginning construction. But Walker had an official-looking document, and he was threatening to have the sheriff shut down the project. Katherine spent a sleepless night trying to figure out how to prove the document was fraudulent. The solution came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen, who had been quietly observing everything, approached Katherine the next morning. "My son," she said carefully. "He works for town surveyor. He says Deputy Walker paid for false document. He says real survey shows your land is correct." Katherine stared at the woman. "Your son can prove this," Mrs. Chen nodded. "He has real papers. He will show sheriff. He is afraid before, but he says you help us. Now we help you." That afternoon, Katherine, Xavier, Mrs. Chen, and her son Chen Y met with Sheriff Morrison. Y, a quiet young man in his 20s, produced the authentic property survey and explained in careful English how Deputy Walker had approached him asking for a falsified document. Y had refused, but Walker had apparently found someone else willing to create a fake. Sheriff Morrison's face grew increasingly grim as he listened. "This is a serious accusation," he said. "Making false legal documents is a crime. Walker is already on thin ice with the mayor over complaints about his conduct. This might be the final straw." Within a week, Deputy Walker was arrested and removed from his position. The charges against him included falsifying legal documents, extortion, and abuse of power. Several Chinese families came forward with evidence of his extortion scheme, and the case against him was overwhelming. Katherine watched him being led away in handcuffs and felt no satisfaction, only relief that the constant harassment was finally over. She turned to Mrs. Chen and Y, who were standing nearby. "Thank you," she said simply. "You did not have to help me, especially after everything Walker had done to your family, but you did anyway, and I will never forget it." "You helped us first," Mrs. Chen said. "You stood up when others looked away. Now we stand up for you." The addition was completed in June. Katherine hosted an open house to show off the new rooms, and nearly half the town came through to admire the work. The rooms were spacious and well appointed, each with its own small stove for heat and large windows for light. The new kitchen was a dream, with a huge cast iron stove, plenty of counter space, and a modern ice box. By July, every room in the expanded boarding house was full, and Katherine was making more money than she had ever thought possible. She hired 2 young women from town to help with cooking and cleaning, which freed up her time considerably. She began keeping more regular hours, closing the kitchen at 8 o'clock each evening instead of working until exhaustion claimed her. This new schedule allowed Katherine and Xavier to spend more time together. They took evening rides into the mountains, where Xavier taught her about ranching and showed her potential properties they might buy. They talked endlessly about their plans, refining their vision for the future. In August, Xavier found the perfect piece of land, 300 acres about 5 miles south of Aspen, with good water, grassland for grazing, and stunning mountain views. The price was reasonable, and with the money Katherine was making from the boarding house and Xavier's savings from his mine work, they could afford it. They bought the land in September, 1 year after Katherine had first arrived in Aspen. Standing on their own property, looking out at the mountains and the valley, Katherine felt overwhelmed with gratitude and joy. A year ago, she had been frightened and alone, facing impossible debts and an uncertain future. Now she was married to a man she loved, running a successful business and preparing to build a ranch. "I cannot believe this is our life," she said to Xavier as they explored the property on horseback. "Sometimes I have to remind myself that this is real, that I am not going to wake up and find it was all a dream, because it seems too good to be true that everything could work out this well, especially after such a difficult beginning. But here we are on our own land, and I am married to you, and the boarding house is thriving, and I just feel so incredibly fortunate." Xavier reached over from his horse to take her hand. "It is real, Kate, and it is not luck, it is you. You made this happen with your hard work and your courage and your refusal to give up even when things looked impossible." They started small with the ranch, exactly as Katherine had suggested. They bought 24 cattle and built a small barn and corral. Xavier spent 3 days a week at the ranch while continuing to help manage the boarding house the other 4 days. It was exhausting work, but they were both young and strong and motivated by their shared vision. In December, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier on Christmas Eve, and he picked her up and spun her around the kitchen despite her laughing protests. They shared the news with the boarders over Christmas dinner, and everyone celebrated with toasts and congratulations. "Have you thought about names?" Mr. Patterson asked. "Not yet," Katherine admitted. "We have time to decide, and I want to make sure we choose something meaningful, something that honors both our families but also stands on its own. Though of course we do not know if it will be a boy or a girl, so we will need to consider options for both possibilities. And I keep making lists in my head, but then changing my mind. Because how do you choose something so important when you have not even met the person yet?" "You will figure it out," Xavier said, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Just like you figure out everything else." The winter passed peacefully. Katherine's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she was often tired and had to reduce her hours at the boarding house even further. The 2 women she had hired, Sarah and Elizabeth, proved more than capable of handling the increased responsibility. Katherine focused on training them thoroughly so that when the baby came, the business would continue to run smoothly. In March, as the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, Katherine and Xavier went out to the ranch to check on the cattle and plan the next phase of development. They were standing near the creek that ran through the property when Katherine felt a strange sensation in her belly. "Xavier," she said, reaching for his hand. "I think the baby just moved." Xavier's face lit up with wonder. He placed his hand where Katherine's had been and waited. After a moment, there it was again, a small flutter that made them both laugh with delight. They stood there by the creek with their hands on Katherine's growing belly, feeling their child move, and Katherine thought she had never been happier in her entire life. Their son was born on a warm day in late July of 1880. The labor was long and difficult, but Katherine was strong, and with the help of the doctor and Mrs. Chen, she brought a healthy baby boy into the world. Xavier was allowed in the room just after the birth, and when the doctor placed the tiny, squalling infant in his arms, tears streamed down his face. "He is perfect," Xavier said, looking from the baby to Katherine with awe. "You are perfect. I cannot believe we made this." They named him Jacob Michael Armstrong, Jacob for Xavier's father and Michael for Katherine's mother, whose maiden name had been Michael's. Little Jacob was a good baby, quiet and alert, with his father's eyes and his mother's dark hair. The boarding house residents were all enchanted with the baby. Mr. Patterson carved a beautiful wooden cradle. Mrs. Chen knitted blankets and tiny clothes. Sarah and Elizabeth fought over who got to hold him during their breaks. Jacob became the unofficial mascot of the Silver Bell, and Katherine found herself with more help than she knew what to do with. As Jacob grew from an infant into a toddler, Katherine and Xavier continued building their dual life. The boarding house remained consistently full and profitable. The ranch slowly expanded, with Xavier adding more cattle and a few horses, building better outbuildings and gradually developing the infrastructure they would need for a full-scale operation. When Jacob was 2, Katherine became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in March of 1883 they welcomed a daughter they named Sarah Rose, after Xavier's mother Sarah, and simply because they both loved roses. Sarah was tiny and delicate where Jacob had been sturdy, and she had Catherine's green eyes and Xavier's serious expression. Life was busy and demanding, but Catherine had never been happier. She woke each morning to the sound of her children laughing and Xavier's steady breathing beside her. She spent her days managing the boarding house, cooking meals, keeping accounts and caring for Jacob and Sarah. She spent evenings with Xavier, talking about everything and nothing while the children played at their feet. When Jacob was 5 and Sarah was 3, Xavier made a suggestion. "I think it is time," he said one evening as they sat on the front porch of the boarding house watching the sun set behind the mountains. "Time to shift more of our focus to the ranch. The boarding house is established and running smoothly with Sarah and Elizabeth managing it. We could move out to the ranch, Kate, build a real house there, make it our primary home." Catherine had been expecting this conversation and had already been thinking through the implications. "You are right," she said slowly. "The boarding house will always be important to me, but I do not need to be here every day anymore. And the children should grow up on the ranch, learning about the land and the animals the way you want to teach them." They spent the next year planning and building. Xavier designed a beautiful ranch house with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a parlor, and a wide front porch. Catherine insisted on big windows to let in light and views of the mountains. They added a separate bunkhouse for hired hands, expanded the barn, and built additional corrals. In the spring of 1885, the Armstrong family moved to the ranch permanently. Catherine kept ownership of the boarding house and visited twice a week to manage the business side, but Sarah and Elizabeth ran the day-to-day operations. It was strange at first, living outside town, but Catherine quickly adapted. She loved the quiet of the ranch, the wide open spaces, the way she could see stars like she had never seen them before. Jacob thrived on the ranch. He followed Xavier everywhere, learning to ride, to rope, to care for the animals. Sarah was more interested in helping Catherine with the garden and the chickens, and she showed an early talent for drawing, spending hours sketching the mountains and the horses. In 1887, Catherine gave birth to their 3rd child, another boy they named Thomas after Xavier's best friend from childhood who had died young. Thomas was a happy, easy baby who rarely cried and seemed content wherever he was placed. The ranch house was full of noise and laughter and love. As the years passed, the ranch grew steadily. Xavier built a reputation for raising quality cattle, and buyers came from as far as Denver to purchase his stock. Catherine continued to manage the boarding house from a distance, and the income from both businesses allowed them to live comfortably and continue investing in improvements. Mr. Patterson passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1889, leaving his savings to Jacob, Sarah, and Thomas in his will. Catherine cried for days, mourning the kind old man who had become like a grandfather to her children. They buried him in the Aspen cemetery, and half the town attended the funeral. Mrs. Chen eventually moved to be closer to her son Y, who had opened his own surveying business in Leadville. Catherine missed her friend but understood the decision. They corresponded regularly, long letters full of news and memories. The boarding house changed hands in 1892. Sarah and Elizabeth, who had been managing it for years, approached Catherine with an offer to buy it outright. Catherine was initially reluctant. The Silver Bell had been her salvation, her first real home in the West, but Xavier pointed out that it made sense. Sarah and Elizabeth had earned the right to own the business they had been running so successfully, and the sale would provide capital to expand the ranch further. Catherine agreed, and the sale was completed with handshakes and tears and promises to remain friends. With the proceeds, Xavier bought an additional 500 acres adjacent to their existing property and built a modern system of irrigation that allowed them to grow hay and alfalfa to supplement their cattle operation. The children grew into young adults. Jacob became a skilled rancher, working alongside Xavier and eventually taking over more and more of the day-to-day operations. Sarah discovered a passion for teaching and went to Denver for 2 years to attend normal school, then returned to Aspen to teach at the growing town school. Thomas showed an unexpected talent for business and began handling the ranch's finances and negotiations, proving to have inherited Katherine's head for numbers. In 1898, on their 20th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Katherine back to the spot where he had first told her. He loved her the back porch of the Silver Bell, which Sarah and Elizabeth had maintained beautifully. The flower boxes that had been dead when Katherine first arrived were now overflowing with blooms, and the building looked prosperous and well-loved. 20 years, Xavier said, pulling Katherine close. 20 years of listening to you talk, and I am still not tired of it. Katherine laughed. I do not talk as much as I used to. Life has made me more thoughtful, more measured in my words. Maybe, Xavier conceded. But when you do talk, I still love every word. I love the way your mind works. I love the way you see connections between things that seem unrelated. I love that you can talk for 10 minutes about why the sky looks different in winter than in summer, or why bread rises better on some days than others, or what our grandchildren might be like someday. Grandchildren, Katherine said with a smile. That is jumping ahead. The children are still young. Jacob is 24, Xavier pointed out. He has been courting that young woman, Emily, from the ranch next to ours. I would not be surprised if he proposes soon. Xavier was right. Jacob married Emily in the summer of 1899, and by the spring of 1900, Katherine and Xavier were grandparents to a little girl named Margaret, after Katherine's aunt. Katherine held her granddaughter and marveled at how quickly time had passed, how the frightened young woman who had arrived in Aspen 22 years ago had become this. A grandmother, a successful businesswoman, the wife of a prosperous rancher, the mother of 3 grown children. Sarah married a few years later, choosing a teacher from Denver who loved books as much as she did. They settled in Aspen, and Sarah continued teaching while her husband started a bookshop. Thomas remained single longer, focused on expanding the ranch's business operations and investing in new ventures around the state. As the new century progressed, Katherine and Xavier gradually handed over more responsibility to their children. Jacob took over the primary management of the ranch. Thomas handled all the business affairs. Sarah and her husband bought a small property where they raised their growing family. Katherine and Xavier entered their 60s with grace, slowing down but never stopping. They still rode out to check on the cattle, though not as often. They still hosted large family dinners, though now others did most of the cooking. They still sat on their porch every evening, watching the sunset and talking. You ever regret it? Katherine asked one evening in 1914. They were both in their mid-60s now, their hair gray, their faces lined by decades of sun and wind and laughter. Staying in Aspen instead of going somewhere else, building this specific life instead of something different. Xavier looked at her with the same expression he had worn that day on the dusty street when he told her he could listen to her forever. Not for 1 second, he said. This life, this place, it is everything I ever wanted and more than I ever dreamed was possible. Every choice we made, every challenge we faced, every moment of joy and struggle, it all led us here. To this porch, to this ranch, to our children and grandchildren, to growing old together. How could I regret any of that? Katherine leaned her head on his shoulder. I feel the same way. I was so frightened that first day in Aspen. I thought I had made a terrible mistake coming here. But it was not a mistake, it was the beginning of everything good in my life. Finding you, building a home, creating a family, all of it started with that frightened girl stepping off the stage and trying to figure out how to survive. And now look at us. Look at us indeed, Xavier agreed, pressing a kiss to her silver hair. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. 3 grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Inside the house, they could hear Jacob and Emily preparing dinner while Thomas argued good-naturedly with Sarah about something Katherine could not quite make out. This was the life they had built together, word by word, day by day, year by year. This was the happily ever after that Katherine had not dared to hope for when she first arrived in Aspen all those years ago. This was the love story written in patience and hard work and endless conversation, in standing up for what was right, in believing in each other even when circumstances seemed impossible. Xavier took Katherine's hand, his fingers automatically finding the familiar shape of hers, and she squeezed back. No words were needed. After more than 3 decades together, they could communicate volumes in a simple touch. But Katherine being Katherine, she spoke anyway. Xavier smiled, the expression creating familiar creases around his eyes. "There you go again," he said softly, "talking and talking." "And you are still listening," Katherine said with a smile of her own. "Always," Xavier promised. "I could listen to you forever." And he did. For all the years they had left together, years filled with watching grandchildren grow into adults with children of their own. Years of quiet contentment mixed with the inevitable sorrows and joys of a long life. Years of sitting on that porch and talking about everything and nothing while the Colorado sun set behind the mountains they had come to call home. When they were both in their 80s, grown old together with a lifetime of memories behind them, they would still sit on that porch. Katherine would still talk, her words perhaps slower but no less thoughtful, and Xavier would still listen with the same attention he had shown that first day on the dusty street in Aspen, when a frightened young woman had apologized for talking too much, and he had told her that he could listen forever. The ranch passed to Jacob, and then to his children, but Xavier and Katherine's presence remained in every board of the house Xavier had built, in every story Katherine told about the early days, in the way their descendants approached life with determination and kindness, and an understanding that love means truly listening to the people who matter most. The boarding house, too, carried their legacy. Though Katherine had sold it decades ago, the Silver Bell remained a landmark in Aspen, still welcoming travelers and workers, still maintaining the standards of cleanliness and kindness that Margaret Keller had established and Katherine had restored. A small plaque by the door told visitors about the remarkable woman who had arrived with nothing but debts and determination, and had built something lasting. In the end, theirs was a story that could be told simply. A cowboy and a young woman who talked too much met on a dusty street in a Colorado mining town and fell in love. But like all true love stories, the simple telling missed the richness of the reality, the daily choosing of each other, the challenges overcome together. The family built one laugh and one conversation and one sunset at a time. Katherine lived to be 87, Xavier to 89. When Katherine passed peacefully in her sleep in 1938, Xavier followed less than a month later, unable or unwilling to exist in a world without her voice. They were buried together in the Aspen cemetery, their gravestone marked with their names and the dates of their long lives, and a simple inscription that Xavier had chosen years before. She talked, he listened, they loved. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered for the funeral, sharing stories about the remarkable couple who had started with nothing but each other and had built an empire of love and land and legacy. The stories they told were full of Katherine's rambling observations and Xavier's steady support, of the deep partnership that had sustained them through more than half a century together, of the way they had complemented each other perfectly, her words and his silence, her quick thinking and his steady patience, her courage and his strength. And in every story, there was the reminder that true love is not about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone who loves you perfectly as you are, who listens when you talk too much, who believes in you when you doubt yourself, who stands beside you through every challenge, and who chooses you every single day for the rest of their life. The ranch continued to thrive. The family continued to grow, and Aspen changed from a rough mining town into a modern city. But the story of Katherine and Xavier remained, passed down through generations, a reminder that the best love stories are not about grand gestures but about the small, daily choice to listen, to support, to believe, and to love without reservation or condition. And somewhere in the memories of the Armstrong family, preserved like precious treasures, were Xavier's words from that first day. "I could listen to you forever." Words that had proven true, words that had changed Katherine's life, words that had built a foundation for everything that came after. Forever had turned out to be a very long time, full of more words than anyone could count, more conversations than anyone could remember, more moments of connection than could ever be catalogued. But it had all been worthwhile, every word, every moment, every year. Because they had spent it together, the cowboy and the woman who talked too much, building a life that was exactly right for both of them. Their story ended as all stories do, with death and farewell, but also with the knowledge that what they had built together in family, in land, in love would continue long after they were gone. The ranch still operated, their descendants still told their stories, and somewhere in the mountains of Colorado, the wind still whispered through the pines around the house Xavier had built for Katherine all those years ago. It was a good ending, a complete ending, full of love and family and years well spent. It was the happily ever after that Katherine had hardly dared to dream of when she stepped off that stage in Aspen in 1878, frightened and alone with nothing but her aunt's debts and her own determination. And it all began with a simple conversation on a dusty street between a young woman who apologized for talking too much and a cowboy who said he could listen to her forever. Sometimes, that is all love needs to begin. Someone willing to speak their truth and someone willing to truly listen. Everything else, all the years and the family and the life they built, grew from that single moment of connection, that recognition of finding someone who accepted you completely and loved you exactly as you were. The end.